If you're seeing this, it means the algorithm let it through. Please like, subscribe, and share the video to help these stories keep circulating. All right. I'm not a writer. I haul freight for a living, mostly up and down the West Coast, but sometimes they send me east into the guts of the country. You get to see a lot from the cab of a Peterbilt. Sunrises that'll make you believe in God and stretches of asphalt so lonely they'll make you question if you even exist. I'm telling you this because I need to get it out, and I don't know who to tell. A shrink would put me on meds. My wife would think I'm on something else, and my dispatcher would just find a new driver. But I saw something out there, and I know I'm not the only one. So I'm putting this out into the void, I guess. See if anyone else has seen them. My name is Rick. I've been driving for about 15 years. It's a job. It pays the bills. It's mostly long hours of listening to talk radio and podcasts, punctuated by the greasy comfort of a truck stop diner. The world for me is a 70-foot-long, 13-foot-high box that I live in for weeks at a time. The road is my home, my office, and sometimes my own personal little slice of hell. The slice I'm talking about is a particular stretch of Interstate 80, cutting through the dead heart of northern Nevada. If you've ever driven it, you know what I'm talking about. It's not just empty. It's a profound kind of nothingness. The Great Basin, it's miles and miles of sagebrush and alkali flats, under a sky that's so big it feels like it's trying to swallow you. During the day, the sun beats down and turns the asphalt into a shimmering mirage. At night, it's one of the darkest places in the country. The kind of dark where you feel like you could open the door and fall right into the stars. It's beautiful in a terrifying way. But it's got a reputation. Drivers talk. We have our own little ghost stories, our own folklore of the road. Every lonely stretch of highway does. You hear tales of phantom headlights, of a ghostly woman in a white dress. Most of it is just that. Stories to pass the time over a cup of burnt coffee. But the stories about I-80 in Nevada, they're different. They're quieter, more consistent. We don't talk about ghosts. We talk about the hitchhikers. It's not like it's a big topic. It's just whispers. A quiet question at a fuel island at 3 a.m. You ever see anyone out there past Elko? And you just get a slow shake of the head and a look that tells you to drop it. But I'd heard the bits and pieces, always the same. A man or sometimes a woman standing by the side of the road, miles from any town, any exit, any sign of a broken-down car. Just standing there. The descriptions varied, but a few details were always the same. They were always pale. Unnaturally pale, like they'd never seen the sun. They were always dressed in simple, slightly outdated clothes. And they never, ever tried to flag you down. They just stood there, motionless, watching you approach, and then watching you disappear in the rearview mirror. For years, that's all it was for me. A story. A bit of road grime in the back of my mind. I'd driven that route dozens, maybe hundreds of times. Seen plenty of weird stuff. A herd of pronghorn antelope flowing over a hill like a river. Dust devils the size of a small house. Once, a whole damn couch sitting perfectly in the middle of the breakdown lane, like someone was just waiting for the bus. But I'd never seen the hitchhikers. I figured it was just another trucker's tale, a product of too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Then, about 2 years ago, I saw my first one. I was deadheading from Salt Lake City to Reno. Empty trailer. It was late, maybe 2 a.m. I'd passed Winnemucca about an hour back, and I was deep in the void. No other headlights, no city glow on the horizon. Just my beams cutting a tunnel through the darkness. The only sound was the drone of the Cummins engine and a podcast about historical mysteries droning on in my ears. I saw him from a good half-mile away, a tall, thin shape on the shoulder. My first thought was, broken down. You don't leave a man stranded out here. It's an unwritten rule of the road. I slowed down, flicked on my hazards, getting ready to pull over. But as I got closer, things started to feel wrong. There was no car, no flashing lights, nothing. Just him. He was standing on the gravel shoulder, perfectly still. He was wearing a dark suit, the kind your grandpa might have worn to church. It wasn't dusty or wrinkled. It looked clean. He was tall and lanky with short, neatly parted dark hair, and his skin, Jesus. Even in the high beams, it looked like bleached bone, not just pale. It was the color of something that had been kept in a dark room for 100 years. The strangest part was his posture. He wasn't looking at me. He was facing the road, but his head was tilted slightly downwards like he was studying the asphalt. He didn't have a thumb out. He didn't make a move. As my truck roared past him, I looked right at him through my passenger window. He didn't lift his head. He didn't react at all. It was like I was a ghost and he was the real thing. I drove for another mile before the adrenaline really hit me. My hands were shaking. I turned down the podcast. The silence in the cab felt huge. Every instinct was screaming at me. A man in a clean suit, standing in the middle of the Nevada desert at 2 a.m., miles from anywhere, not trying to get a ride, not even acknowledging a 40-ton semi-truck passing 3 feet from him. It didn't make any sense. I thought about calling it in on the CB, but what would I say? There's a guy standing by the road. They'd laugh me off the channel. I thought about calling highway patrol. Again, what's the crime? Loitering in the desert? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was a surveyor. Maybe he was a geologist. Maybe his car was just over a small rise where I couldn't see it. But none of it felt right. The image of his bone-white skin and the perfect stillness of him was burned into my mind. I kept checking my mirrors for a long time after, half expecting to see him standing in the middle of my lane. But there was nothing. Just the endless dark. I didn't see another one for a few months. Long enough for me to almost convince myself I'd imagined it. That I'd been tired, maybe dozed off for a split second and had a waking dream. It was easier to believe that. The next time, it was a woman. Same stretch of road, a little closer to Battle Mountain this time. It was dusk, that weird hazy time when the world turns purple and gray. She was standing in almost the exact same spot on the shoulder. She wore a simple, light-colored dress, like something from the 1960s. She had blonde hair in a neat bob, and the same skin, that same dead, lunar white. Like the other one, she was just standing there, staring at the ground. No luggage, no car, just a pale statue in the fading light. This time I didn't slow down. I put my foot down and looked straight ahead, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned as white as her skin. But I couldn't help but glance in the mirror. She was still there, a tiny, pale speck in the vast landscape, not moving an inch. After that, I started seeing them more often. Maybe once every 4 or 5 trips through Nevada. Never in the same place twice, but always on that desolate 200-mile stretch between Winnemucca and Salt Flats. Sometimes it was a man, sometimes a woman. Once, it looked like a teenager, a boy in a thin jacket. Always the same pale skin, the same stillness, the same unnerving lack of reaction. It got to the point where I'd start feeling a knot in my stomach as soon as I passed the Elko City limits. My eyes would scan the shoulder, dreading what I might see. I tried to bring it up once, very cautiously, with an old-timer named Gus at a diner in Sparks. Gus had been driving since the 70s. If anyone knew the road's secrets, it was him. I waited until we were on our third coffee refill. "Gus," I said, trying to sound casual, "you ever see anything weird on 80, out in the basin?" He took a long, slow sip of his coffee, looking at me over the rim of the mug. His eyes were tired but sharp. "What kind of weird?" he asked. "I don't know. People. Just standing out there." Gus put his mug down with a soft click. He stared out the window at the rows of trucks sleeping under the parking lot lights. "Pale folk," he said. It wasn't a question. My blood ran cold. "Yeah," I managed to say. "Yeah, exactly. Been seeing them for 40 years, he said, his voice a low rumble. "Saw my first one back in 78, kid in a Letterman jacket. Looked like he stepped right out of a high school yearbook from 55. Scared the hell out of me." "What are they?" I asked, leaning in. He shook his head. "Don't know. Don't want to know. There's a rule, kid. You see one of them, you look forward. You keep your foot on the gas. You don't stop. You don't ever stop. That road, it's old, and it's hungry. Some things are best left on the shoulder." He wouldn't say another word about it. He just changed the subject to fuel prices and the new DOT regulations. But his warning stuck with me. You don't ever stop. And for a long time I didn't. I saw them, these pale figures haunting the edge of my vision, and I just pushed that Cummins engine a little harder, turned the radio up a little louder, and drove right on by. They were just part of the landscape now, a creepy, unexplainable part of my job, like a recurring nightmare you get used to. Until last month. Last month, I broke the rule. And I think I might have broken my mind too. It happened on a Tuesday. I was hauling a load of consumer electronics to Salt Lake. The weather was clear, the road was dry. Everything was normal. I was making good time. I'd passed Battle Mountain and the sun was setting, painting the sky in those insane desert colors of orange and pink and deep violet. I was feeling pretty good. The loneliness of the road didn't feel oppressive that night. It felt peaceful. And then I saw her. She was standing about 100 yards ahead on the right shoulder. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She had long dark hair and was wearing a simple, thin-looking coat. And she was doing something none of the others had ever done. She had her thumb out. That one simple gesture changed everything. It broke the pattern. The others were passive statues, objects to be observed and feared from a distance. This one was asking for help. My foot instinctively came off the accelerator. Gus's words echoed in my head. You don't ever stop. But my own rule, the one that every decent person follows, was screaming louder. You don't leave someone stranded out here. Especially not a young woman. What if her car had broken down and she'd walked for miles? What if she was in trouble? I was wrestling with myself, my truck slowing from 70 to 60. She wasn't looking at me. Like the others, her head was slightly bowed. But her arm was extended, thumb pointing east. It was a plea. Damn it, I muttered to the empty cab. I told myself this was different. She was actively asking for a ride. She wasn't just a weird statue. She was a person in need. To just blow past her felt wrong. Inhuman. I made a split-second decision. I flicked my turn signal on and started easing the big rig onto the wide gravel shoulder. The air brakes hissed, and the whole truck shuddered as I brought it to a stop about 50 feet past her. I left the engine running, its low grumble a comforting sound in the sudden stillness. I looked in my passenger side mirror. She hadn't moved. She was still standing there, thumb out, head down. She hadn't even turned to look at the massive truck that had just pulled over for her. A fresh wave of unease washed over me. "Hello?" I shouted through the open window, but the wind snatched my voice away. I hesitated for a moment, then I did something I rarely do. I killed the engine. The sudden, absolute silence of the desert rushed in. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears and the faint tink-tink-tink of the cooling engine. I took a deep breath, unbuckled my seatbelt, and climbed out of the cab. The air was cool and smelled of sagebrush and dust. The last sliver of the sun was on the horizon, and the sky was a deep, bruised purple. "Hey, you need a hand?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vastness. Slowly, so slowly, she lifted her head, and my heart stopped. It was her skin. Gus had called them pale folk, but that didn't do it justice. Her face was the color of milk, of polished marble. There was no flush of life in her cheeks, no pink in her lips. They were a faint, bloodless gray. Her eyes were huge and dark, and they seemed to drink the last of the light. She looked wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Like a photograph that had been leached of all its color. She didn't answer me. She just lowered her arm and started walking towards the truck. Her movements were deliberate, stiff. There was no natural sway to her gait. Each step seemed pre-calculated, like a machine learning to walk. Is your car broken down?" I asked, my voice trembling a little. I was backing up towards the steps of my cab, my hand reaching for the door handle. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. This was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. She stopped at the front of my truck just below the passenger door and looked up at me. Her expression was completely blank. Not scared, not relieved. Nothing. It was like looking at a doll's face. "I need a ride," she said. Her voice was the worst part. It was flat. A perfect, toneless monotone. There was no inflection, no emotion. It was like a computer-generated voice from the early 90s. And it was quiet. So quiet I could barely hear it over the pounding in my chest. Even in the dead silence of the desert. Where are you headed?" I stammered, my hand now gripping the handle of my cab door so tightly it hurt. "East," she said. That was all. Just east. My mind was racing. Get in the truck, lock the doors, drive away, leave her here. But I was frozen. It was like my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped in this bizarre, terrifying nightmare. I couldn't just leave her, could I? What if I was wrong? What if she was just sick or in shock? Before I could decide, she reached out and opened the passenger door. The sound of the latch clicking echoed like a gunshot in the silence. She pulled herself up into the cab with that same strange, stiff grace and sat down in the passenger seat. Then she pulled the door shut. I was standing on the ground looking up at my own truck, a complete stranger now sitting inside it. A stranger with skin like death and a voice like a machine. I was terrified, but I also felt a strange morbid curiosity and a sense of responsibility. I had stopped. I had let her in. This was my problem now. Taking a shaky breath, I climbed back into the driver's seat. The cab suddenly felt small, cramped. I could feel her presence beside me, a block of ice sucking all the warmth out of the air. As I fumbled with my seatbelt, I got my first real whiff of the smell. It was faint, but it was there. A clean chemical smell, sharp and sterile. It reminded me of biology class in high school, the day we dissected frogs. Formaldehyde. I turned the key. The big Cummins engine roared to life, and the sound was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. It was real. It was powerful. It was my escape. I checked my mirrors, pulled the gear shifter, and eased the truck back onto the highway. I didn't look at her. I just stared straight ahead at the darkening road. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the tires on the pavement. The silence from the passenger seat was heavy. It had a physical weight to it. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't looking out the window. I could feel her eyes on me. I risked a quick glance. She was sitting perfectly upright, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead at the dashboard. She wasn't breathing. I'm not saying I couldn't hear her breathing. I'm saying there was no movement, no rise and fall of her chest, no fog on the window, even as the night air got colder. She was as still as a mannequin. So, been walking long? I asked, just to break the terrible silence. My voice was hoarse. A while, she replied in that same dead, flat tone. Car break down? No. The conversation died right there. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. The chemical smell seemed to be getting stronger, mixing with the familiar cab scents of stale coffee and diesel. It was making my eyes water. I tried to rationalize again. She's in shock. She's autistic. She's on drugs. Anything but the terrifying truth that was sitting in the back of my mind. The truth that Gus had warned me about. I had one of the pale folk in my truck. We drove on. The last of the light vanished, and the world outside my headlights disappeared into an inky blackness. We were a tiny, self-contained universe hurtling through the void, a universe containing me, and this thing. Maybe an hour passed, maybe 2. Time had lost all meaning. My entire focus was on the road ahead and the cold presence beside me. My muscles were coiled so tight I felt like I was going to snap. Then the truck sputtered. It was just a slight hesitation, a cough from the engine. But on a perfectly maintained rig like mine, it was the sound of doom. I glanced at my gauges. Everything looked normal. Fuel was fine, temperature was steady, but a second later, it happened again. A bigger shudder this time. The engine coughed, choked, and then died. The roar of the Cummins was replaced by a high-pitched whine from the tires on the asphalt. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging us into absolute terrifying darkness. The power steering was gone. I wrestled with the wheel, fighting the momentum of 40 tons of dead weight, and managed to guide the truck to a lurching, groaning stop on the shoulder. Silence. The same profound, deep silence from before. But this time it was 10 times more terrifying. We were stranded, in the middle of nowhere, in the pitch black, with it. What happened? Her voice, when it came, was so calm, so devoid of any surprise or fear, that it made the hair on my arms stand up. I don't know, I stammered. Engine just quit. Never happened before. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I dropped it twice. When I finally clicked it on, the beam cut a shaky path through the darkness of the cab. I pointed it at the dashboard, at the ignition. Nothing. The truck was completely dead. Not a single light, not a single sign of life. It was like the battery had just vanished. I've gotta check the engine, I said, my voice a squeak. I needed to get out of the cab. I needed to get away from her. I pushed my door open and practically fell out onto the gravel. The air was cold and the wind was picking up, whispering through the sagebrush. I shone my flashlight beam on the massive front grille of the truck, then popped the latches to open the hood. The heavy piece of fiberglass swung up with a groan. I'm not a master mechanic, but I know my way around my engine. I shone the light over the massive block of steel and hoses, Everything looked fine. No snapped belts, no leaking fluids, no disconnected wires. It just wasn't working. It was while I was leaning over the engine block, my mind racing, that I heard the first sound. It was a howl, but it wasn't the howl of a coyote. I've heard plenty of those. This was deeper, heavier. It was a sound that vibrated in my chest cavity, a guttural, predatory cry that spoke of size and power. It came from somewhere out in the darkness to the north. And then another one answered it, from the south. My blood turned to ice water. I slammed the hood shut and scrambled back towards the cab door. I fumbled with the handle, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I threw myself back into the driver's seat and slammed the door, fumbling to hit the lock button. The locks engaged with a heavy clunk. I was breathing hard, my chest heaving. "What was that?" my passenger asked. Still that same flat, curious tone, like a scientist observing a new phenomenon. "Wolves," I lied, though I knew it wasn't true. Wolves had been reintroduced to parts of the West, but they weren't this far south. And they didn't sound like that. This was something else. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. The key just turned uselessly. The truck was a dead metal tomb. And then I saw them. Just at the edge of my flashlight beam, which I was now pointing frantically out the windshield, I saw movement. A pair of eyes glowing a sickly yellow-green, reflecting the light. Then another pair, and another. They were low to the ground, moving with a fluid, powerful grace. They weren't wolves. They were too big, far too big. The one that stepped fully into the beam of my light was the size of a small bear, but it was shaped like a canine. It had thick, shaggy fur the color of night and dust. Its head was massive, with a long snout full of teeth that seemed too large for its jaw. But the most terrifying thing was its intelligence. It wasn't just a dumb animal. The way it moved, the way it watched the truck, its head cocked to the side. It was studying us. My passenger made a sound. It was the first time I'd heard any hint of inflection in her voice. It was a low, soft hiss, the sound of static. More shapes were emerging from the darkness. They were circling the truck. I could hear the crunch of their heavy paws on the gravel shoulder. There were at least 5 or 6 of them. They moved with a chilling, silent purpose. My flashlight beam danced from one to the next, revealing glimpses of massive shoulders, powerful legs, and those same intelligent, glowing eyes. This is it, I thought. I'm going to die out here, torn apart by whatever these things are. I was paralyzed by a terror so pure and absolute it felt like my heart had been replaced by a block of ice. But they weren't trying to get to me. One of the largest creatures, the one I'd seen first, padded silently to the passenger side of the truck, right below the door. It stopped and looked up. It wasn't looking at the truck as a whole. It was looking directly at the window, directly at her. And then the strangest thing happened. The creature. It wasn't snarling, it wasn't baring its teeth in aggression. Its expression, if you can call it that, was one of grim determination. Like a sheepdog facing down a stubborn ram. Inside the cab, the woman was completely still. But the hissing sound was getting louder. It was a dry, scraping sound like sand on glass. The air in the cab grew impossibly cold. The chemical smell was overpowering now, burning my nostrils. Then, a sound that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. A loud bang against the passenger door. The whole truck rocked. The creature had thrown its weight against the door. Another bang, louder this time. The metal of the door groaned in protest. I screamed. I couldn't help it. A raw, pathetic sound. I was scrabbling at my own door, trying to get out, to run, but there was nowhere to go. They were all around us. Bang! A crack appeared in the passenger side window. The woman turned her head and looked at me. Her dark eyes were wide, and for the first time there was something in them. Not fear, not anger. It was a look of pure, cold hatred. And it was directed at me. "You stopped," she hissed, her voice now a distorted, static-filled rasp. Crack! The window spiderwebbed. The creature outside reared up on its hind legs. Its head was now level with the window. It was enormous. It placed one massive clawed paw against the glass, and with a sound of screeching metal and shattering safety glass, it tore the entire door off its hinges. The cold night air flooded the cab. The creature stuck its massive head inside. Its hot, foul breath filled the small space. It smelled of earth and blood and something ancient, like a freshly opened tomb. But it ignored me completely. I was pressed back against my own door, trying to make myself as small as possible, whimpering like a child. The creature's glowing yellow eyes were fixed solely on the woman. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just made that awful, hissing, static sound as the creature's huge jaws clamped down on her shoulder. It pulled her out of the cab as easily as I might pull a bag of groceries out of my car. I watched, frozen in horror, my flashlight beam illuminating the hellish scene on the gravel shoulder. The other creatures closed in. They didn't snarl or fight over her. They moved with that same terrifying efficiency. They weren't eating her. They were tearing her apart. One of them bit into her leg, and it came away with a sound like ripping wet cardboard. Another one grabbed her arm, and it detached at the shoulder with a sickening pop. But there was no blood. There was no tissue, no muscle, no bone. Where her arm had been, there was just a gaping hole. And inside her was nothing. Nothing but a thick, black, viscous goo. It oozed from the torn places, a substance that was blacker than the night itself. It didn't drip like liquid. It moved like tar, slow and deliberate. It didn't smell like blood. It smelled of burnt wires and ozone. The creatures were pulling her to pieces. They ripped off her head and it rolled a few feet, her face still locked in that blank, doll-like expression. There was no spine, no skull, just a hollow shell filled with that same black ooze. They worked quickly, methodically. They tore the limbs, the torso, the head into smaller and smaller pieces. They weren't feeding. They were dismantling, cleaning, erasing. I finally found my voice and I started screaming. I screamed until my throat was raw. I couldn't look away. I saw one of the creatures pick up a piece of her leg and shake it violently, and the black goo spattered onto the ground where it seemed to sizzle and steam for a moment before dissolving into nothing. Within a minute it was over. There was nothing left of her. Not a scrap of clothing, not a piece of her pale synthetic skin. The creatures had consumed it all, or destroyed it. The black ooze was gone. There was no sign that she had ever existed. The creatures stood there for a moment, panting softly. They looked at the spot where she had been. Then, one by one, they turned and melted back into the darkness. The big one, the one that had pulled her from the cab, was the last to leave. Before it disappeared, it turned its head and looked directly at me, still sitting in the ruined truck. It held my gaze for a heart-stopping second, and then it was gone. Silence. The passenger door was gone. The window was shattered. The cold wind was blowing through my cab. But I was alive, and I was alone. I sat there for I don't know how long, shaking uncontrollably. The sun was starting to rise, painting the eastern sky a pale, sickly gray before I could even move. As the first light touched the scene, I cautiously climbed out of the truck. I walked over to the spot on the shoulder. There was nothing. No blood, no goo, no scraps of anything. Just disturbed gravel where they had stood. My hand was still shaking as I reached into my pocket for my phone to call for a tow. And then I stopped. What would I say? My truck broke down, and a pack of giant monster wolves tore my passenger apart, but it's okay because she was full of black goo? They'd lock me up and throw away the key. I walked back to the cab. I looked at the ignition. On a desperate, insane whim, I put the key in and turned it. The engine roared to life on the first try. The headlights came on. The dashboard lit up. Everything was perfect, like it had never been dead at all. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto I-80. I drove with a gaping hole where my passenger door should have been, the cold desert wind screaming in my ears. I didn't stop until I got to Salt Lake City. I told the company that a freak gust of wind from a passing truck had ripped the door off on its hinges. They didn't believe me, but they couldn't prove otherwise. They replaced the door. I took a week off. It wasn't enough. I still drive. I have to. It's the only thing I know how to do. But I don't take the I-80 route through Nevada anymore. I'll go hundreds of miles out of my way to avoid it. I can't go back there. I know what I saw. Those things. Those pale hitchhikers. They're not ghosts. They're something else. Something that mimics us. Something that wears our skin like a suit. And they're out there on the lonely roads waiting. And the other things, the creatures that look like wolves, they're not monsters. They're not hunting people, they're hunting them. Gus said the road was old and hungry. He was wrong. The road is a hunting ground. And those creatures, they're the cleanup crew. They're the antibodies to the road's infection. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this knowledge. I feel like I've peeked behind a curtain I was never meant to see. The world feels thinner now. Less real. When I look at people, I find myself looking for the seams, wondering if their skin is just a shell. So that's my story. That's what happened on I-80. I'm putting this out here because I have to. I have to know if anyone else has seen them, the pale folk, or the guardians that hunt them. Am I crazy? Or is the world just a whole lot stranger and more terrifying than we're led to believe? If you drive the lonely roads at night, be careful. And for God's sake, whatever you do, don't stop for the hitchhikers. Story 2. I guess I should start by saying I'm not crazy. Or at least I didn't think I was until about 3 months ago. My name isn't important. What's important is what's been happening on my quiet, tree-lined street in what's supposed to be one of the safest, most affluent suburbs of Chicago. I've lived in this house for 10 years. It's a nice house. Big. Maybe too big for just me since Rebecca left, but I like the space. The neighbors were the kind of people you'd expect in a neighborhood like this. Investment bankers, surgeons, lawyers. People who give you a crisp nod when they get their morning paper and bring you an overpriced bottle of wine at Christmas. We have a homeowners association that sends out passive-aggressive newsletters about lawn maintenance and aesthetic harmony. It was boring, predictable, safe. God, I miss boring. My life was pretty simple. I work from home as a software developer, so my days are mostly spent in my second-floor office, which overlooks the street. I see the Amazon trucks making their rounds, the nannies pushing strollers, the fleets of identical landscaping crews. I know the rhythm of this place. I know Mrs. Gable down the street walks her yapping poodle at exactly 7:15 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. I know the kid across the street gets his souped-up Mustang back from the shop every other Tuesday, and always revs the engine 3 times. It was a life of comfortable, unthinking observation. The house next door, the one directly to my right, had been empty for about a year. Old Mr. Henderson passed away, and his kids, who all live on the coasts, finally got around to selling it. It's a beautiful place, a sprawling two-story brick colonial, even bigger than mine, with a huge ancient oak tree in the front yard. The for sale sign sat on the lawn for months. This isn't the kind of neighborhood where houses sell fast. The price tags and property taxes tend to scare most people off. So when the sold sticker finally went up, we were all a little curious. Who were the new people? Would they have kids? Would they be the type to host loud, obnoxious parties? The usual suburban speculation. They moved in on a Tuesday in the middle of the night. That was the first weird thing. It wasn't a Mayflower or a U-Haul truck like you'd expect. It was a series of identical, unmarked white vans, the kind with no windows in the back. They started arriving around 11 p.m. and went on until almost dawn. I only know because I'm a night owl and I was up debugging a particularly nasty piece of code. I watched from my office window, the glow of my monitor reflecting on the glass. The people, I could only ever make out their silhouettes, moved with a swift, silent purpose. There was no chatter, no shouting, a little to the left. Just the soft hum of the van engines and the dull, heavy thud of boxes being carried inside. The next morning, the vans were gone. There was no sign that anyone had moved in, except for one thing. It was so bizarre I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Every single window on the front of the house, and I mean every single one, from the big bay window in the living room to the tiny little porthole in the upstairs bathroom, was covered from the inside with what looked like aluminum foil. It was fitted perfectly, right up to the edges, gleaming dully in the morning sun. It made the stately old house look blind and sterile, like a giant sealed evidence bag. Days turned into weeks, and we never saw them. Not once. No one came out to get the mail. It just piled up in their box until the mail carrier stopped coming and left a notice on the door. No one put out the trash or recycling bins. The lawn, which Mr. Henderson had kept as meticulously manicured as a golf green, started to grow wild, sprouting dandelions and weeds with a vengeance. The HOA sent a letter, then another. I saw them taped to the front door, the expensive letterhead getting soggy in the spring rain. The only sign of life was at night. Those same unmarked white vans would return, usually between 2 and 4 a.m. They'd pull into the driveway, kill the engine and lights instantly, and then 2 or 3 figures would emerge and carry these large, heavy-looking crates into the house through a side door. The crates were strange. They were made of some kind of dark, molded plastic, and they all had this bright red and black symbol stenciled on the side. It was the universal symbol for biohazardous waste. They moved with an unsettling efficiency, never making a sound, before getting back in the van and disappearing back into the pre-dawn darkness. I tried to tell myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe they were medical researchers working on something top secret. Maybe they were eccentric artists using strange materials. Maybe they were just intensely private people with a weird decorating sense and a nocturnal schedule. I work in tech. I know people who are basically vampires and hate the sun. But the foil on the windows, the medical waste crates, it didn't sit right. It felt wrong. It was a cold, silent spot in our warm, sunny little neighborhood. My other neighbors noticed too. We'd have hushed conversations over the fence while pretending to trim our hedges. "Did you see the vans again last night? What do you think is going on in there?" But no one did anything. What could we do? Complaining about someone's window decorations seemed petty, And calling the cops because someone gets deliveries at night felt like an overreaction. So we just watched, and we wondered, and we started to feel a little less safe in our perfect, predictable homes. The dog started appearing about a month after the new neighbors moved in. At first, it was just one. I saw it from my office window, trotting along the edge of their overgrown lawn with a disturbing confidence. It was huge. I don't mean big like a Great Dane or a Mastiff. I mean unnaturally so. Its shoulders were too broad, its legs too long and corded with muscle. Its fur was a matted, patchy mess of black and gray, like a stray that had been through hell and back. But it wasn't the size that got me. It was the way it moved. It didn't move like a dog. It moved with a strange, fluid grace, a predatory lope that was almost feline in its efficiency. And its eyes. I only got a quick glimpse, but they seemed to catch the light in a way that wasn't right. They looked intelligent, aware. Soon there were more. A pack of them. 4, sometimes 5 of these massive, monstrous-looking canids. They never barked. They never yelped or whined. The silence was one of the most unnerving things about them. They just prowled. They stuck to the perimeter of the weird neighbor's house, a silent, menacing patrol. They'd sit in the shade of the overgrown oak trees, perfectly still for hours on end, just watching. Watching the house, watching the street, watching me. The other people in the neighborhood were terrified. Mrs. Gable stopped her morning walks entirely. The kid across the street stopped leaving his precious Mustang parked on the street overnight. Animal control was called repeatedly, but it was useless. Every time the little white truck would pull up, the dogs would be gone, vanished into thin air. The officer would walk around, scratch his head, talk to a few of us, and then leave. An hour later, like clockwork, the dogs would be back, sitting in the exact same spots, watching with those cold, intelligent, unreadable eyes. I started to get obsessed. My work suffered. I spent most of my days at my window, binoculars in hand, just watching them. I tried to take pictures with my phone, but they always came out blurry, indistinct shapes in the shadows. It was like the camera couldn't quite capture them properly, like they were some kind of visual glitch. The dogs were mangy and looked like strays, but they were also incredibly well fed. Their muscles rippled under their patchy fur. Where were they getting food? I never saw the neighbors put out bowls. I never saw them interact with the dogs at all. The animals were just there. A self-appointed, terrifying guard. Then came the incident with the cat. My next-door neighbor on the other side, the Prestons, had this fluffy Persian cat named Patches. A dumb, friendly animal that liked to sunbathe on the warm bricks of our shared fence. One afternoon, I was staring out my kitchen window when I saw Patches hop off the fence and wander into the edge of the weird neighbor's yard, probably chasing a butterfly. Before I could even stand up or shout, one of the dogs was on it. It wasn't a frenzy of barking and growling. It was silent, brutally efficient. The dog moved like a blur of black fur, covering 20 yards in an instant. There was a single pathetic squeak. Then it was over. The dog didn't eat the cat. It just broke it. It picked up the limp white body in its massive jaws, carried it to the side of the house that was out of my line of sight, and disappeared. A few moments later, it came back alone. I was shaken to my core. I called the Prestons. They were devastated. I told them what I saw, and they called the police. Of course, when the police came, the dogs were gone. There was no sign of Patches, not a single tuft of fur. The officer looked at me like I was a crazy person, a lonely man making up stories to get attention. After that, the Prestons started looking at me that way too. But I knew what I saw. I saw the intelligence in that dog's eyes as it looked back at my window right before it took the cat. It wasn't the look of a dumb animal acting on instinct. It was a look of purpose. It was a warning. That was it for me. This wasn't just weird anymore. It was dangerous. I stopped sleeping. I'd sit in my dark office all night, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of dread, watching their house. The vans kept coming. The biohazard crates kept getting unloaded. But now I started noticing something else. Sometimes after the vans left, a different kind of vehicle would arrive. A sleek black sedan with windows so heavily tinted they looked like polished obsidian. A man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit would get out, carrying a small, locked briefcase, and would be led into the house through the side door. He'd stay for exactly 1 hour, then emerge and be driven away. It was all so precise, so methodical. I had to know what was going on. I spent a couple of $1,000s on a high-end security camera system, the kind with 4K resolution, night vision, and a powerful zoom lens. I spent a whole afternoon mounting one of the cameras on the side of my house, shielded by the eaves, aimed directly at their side door where all the activity happened. I ran the feed directly to a dedicated monitor on my desk. I was going to get proof. I was going to show everyone I wasn't crazy. The first few nights I got nothing but crystal clear, crisp footage of the same routine. Van arrives, crates are unloaded, van leaves. But then, on the fourth night, I caught something. One of the figures carrying a crate stumbled on a loose paving stone. The crate fell and cracked open on the driveway. It wasn't medical waste inside. For a horrifying, crystal-clear second before the figures scrambled to cover the spill, my camera zoomed in. It was parts. Pale, oddly shaped, and horribly recognizable. They weren't animal parts. Before I could even process the nausea rising in my throat, the figures were frantically scooping the contents back into the broken box and rushing it inside. One of them, a tall, thin silhouette, stopped and looked directly at the side of my house. I couldn't see a face, just a dark shape against the security light. But I felt a palpable wave of malice, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The next morning, a crew of workmen arrived. By noon, a new 8-foot-tall privacy fence had been erected between our properties, completely blocking my view. They knew. They knew I was watching. My paranoia went into overdrive. I started hearing noises at night. Scrabbling sounds on my roof like heavy claws on shingles. A soft, wet scratching at my back door. I'd check my camera feeds, frantically switching between angles. But there was never anything there. The dogs, however, changed their behavior. They stopped just patrolling the neighbor's yard. Now they were patrolling mine. I'd see them from my windows, sitting on my lawn, just outside the reach of my motion-activated porch lights, their eyes glowing faintly in the deep dark. They were watching me now, penning me in. I was a prisoner in my own home. I had groceries delivered and would only open the door after the driver was long gone. I stopped answering my phone. My world shrank to the view from my windows and the flickering images on my security monitor. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I imagining the sounds? Was I blowing this all out of proportion? Maybe they really were just eccentric recluses, and the dogs were just aggressive strays that had claimed the territory. But then, what was in those crates? And why did I have the unshakable feeling that those eyes, the eyes of the dogs, were not animal eyes? They were too knowing, too human. Last night, everything broke. It was around 3 a.m. The usual white van had just pulled away, its tail lights disappearing down the silent street. I was staring at my monitor, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. The dogs were there, all 5 of them sitting in a perfect semicircle on my front lawn facing my house. A silent, terrifying siege. Then I heard a new sound. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the neighbor's house. A scream. A high-pitched, terrified human scream, quickly muffled. Then a crash, like a heavy piece of furniture being thrown across a room. My blood ran cold. I cranked up the audio on my security feed, my hand trembling. I could hear muffled shouting, the thud of bodies hitting walls, sounds of a violent struggle. And then, the dogs on my lawn moved. It was the most horrific thing I have ever seen. They didn't run towards the sound to investigate. They moved as one, a coordinated unit, their powerful legs eating up the ground. They ran towards the house. Their house. They didn't bother with the door. The biggest one, the one that took the cat, simply launched itself, a 150-pound missile of muscle and fur, straight through the large window on the side of the house. The reinforced glass exploded inwards with a deafening crash. The others followed, pouring into the dark house through the shattered frame like a wave of pure violence. The sounds from inside became a symphony from hell. It was a cacophony of shrieking, not just of pain, but of sheer abject terror that went beyond anything human. There were guttural snarls, the wet, tearing sound of flesh, the sickening percussive crunch of bone. It wasn't a dogfight. It was a slaughter, an extermination. Through the broken window, I saw flashes of movement, shadows twisting and thrashing in a macabre dance of death. I saw one of the people from the house, a short, stocky silhouette, try to climb out another window, only to be dragged back inside by a shape of impossible speed and violence. The entire event lasted maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. And then, as quickly as it started, it was silent. A dead, heavy, ringing silence that was more terrifying than the noise it replaced. I sat there, frozen in my chair, for what felt like an hour, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I couldn't process what I had just witnessed. It wasn't just dogs attacking their owners. It was something else. An execution. A culling. Slowly, one by one, they emerged from the broken window. They were covered in something dark and wet that glistened in the moonlight. They weren't panting like tired dogs. They stood straight and still, their movements calm and deliberate, almost regal. One of them stopped and looked back at the house. Then it turned its head and looked directly at my camera. It looked directly at me. And in the crisp 4K night vision of my expensive camera, I saw its eyes. For the first time, I saw them without shadow or doubt. They were not the eyes of a dog. They were unmistakably, horribly human, filled with a cold, ancient, and calculating intelligence and recognition. They know I saw. The dogs are on my porch now, all 5 of them. They aren't scratching or snarling. They're just sitting there, waiting. I can see their shapes through the frosted glass panels on my front door. They know I'm in here. I've barricaded the doors with furniture, but I know it won't do any good. I saw what they did to that house. I saw what they did to the people inside. My phone has no service. My internet is down. I'm writing this on a cached page, praying to God it posts. I don't know what they are, but they're not dogs. They're something else. Something that wears the shape of a dog. I can hear them now, just on the other side of the door. They're breathing. A slow, steady, patient sound. They're waiting for me.